Ian. Today, let's follow the journey of the Bible coming together. The Bible we know today wasn't created in a single moment, Ian. It took over 1,000 years of careful selection, debate, and community consensus to put it all together. And that process tells us something fascinating about how humans preserve what matters most to them.
That's such an interesting way to look at it. Pappy, how did they even begin to tackle something that massive?
Well, think of it like building a pyramid. They started with the foundation. For the Hebrew Bible, they began with the Torah around 400 BCE, then added the prophet section by 200 BCE, and finally completed it with the writings between 200 BCE and 100 CE.
So it was like they were constructing it layer by layer over centuries. Who was making these huge decisions?
That's where it gets exciting. There was this group called the Great Assembly, 120 scholars, scribes, and prophets who were the ancient world's most impressive editorial board. They weren't just picking books, though, they were establishing practices that would shape Judaism for generations.
Hmm. Pappy, that must have created some interesting debates. How did they decide what cut?
Ian, they had surprisingly clear criteria, especially for the New Testament. They looked at three main things: whether it was written by an apostle or their close associate, whether it aligned with Orthodox teaching, and whether early churches widely accepted it. But here's where it gets wild. This guy named Marcion shows up around 140 CE and tries to create his stripped down version.
Oh, wow. What did he do?
Well, Marcion only wanted 10 of Paul's letters and an edited version of Luke's gospel. He was eventually labeled a heretic, but, and here's the irony, his actions forced the early church to get serious about defining which writings were truly authoritative.
That's fascinating how something potentially destructive ended up having such a constructive impact on the process.
Exactly. And by 367 CE, we get this crucial letter from Athanasius that lists the same 27 book we now know as the New Testament. But here's what's critical to understand. These formal recognitions weren't creating something new, they were acknowledging what communities had already accepted as authentic.
So it was more like documenting what was already working in practice rather than imposing new rules from above.
Precisely. And when Constantine commissioned 50 Bibles for Constantinople's churches in 331 CE, he didn't even specify which books to include. That's how well established the canon already was. Then Jerome comes along and creates the Latin Vulgate translation that becomes the Bible for over 1,000 years.
That's quite a legacy. How did different Christian traditions end up with slightly different versions?
Well, that's where the organic nature of the process shows. Each tradition, Catholic, Protestant, Eastern Orthodox, recognized what had proven meaningful in their communities over centuries. Scholar Michael Kruger describes it beautifully, saying the canon was like a seedling sprouting from the soil of early Christianity, though it wasn't entirely a tree until the fourth century. It was there from the beginning.
That's such a vivid way of describing how something can develop naturally over time while staying true to its roots.
And what's particularly fascinating is how democratic this process was in its way. These weren't arbitrary decisions made in isolation. Each step was grounded in how these texts had functioned in real communities. the councils at Hippo and Carthage in the late 300s weren't creating something new. They were recognizing what had already proven itself authentic.
So, in a way, PAPPY, the Bible's formation tells us something about how humans preserve and transmit what's most meaningful to them across generations.
EAN, that's exactly right. When you look at the big picture, what you see isn't some top down decree, but this organic process of communities recognizing what spoke to them as divine inspiration. It's a reminder that our most enduring cultural achievements often emerge naturally from human experience rather than being imposed from above.